Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. This is episode 304, and we're going to talk about a lot of things: the Epstein list, USAID again, and Hurricane Trump, and of course, the potential danger or risk looming on the horizon. Yesterday, my youngest had a birthday, and so I took the day off to have cake with him. He still didn't want to play with me, but then that's probably because he's a teenager now. But anyway, so I'm back, and so much is happening. So let's get right into it. So Pam Bondi today, there's a video floating around where she's demanding that the Epstein list be released. The caption says something like she unsealed the list and she looked at it and she demands that it be made public. And I think from my understanding, Kash Patel has to be confirmed. He's the FBI he would become the new FBI head. And if he does secure that confirmation, then apparently he has control of it and he'll release the list. If you don't know who Epstein is, Jeffrey Epstein, he had an island called Epstein Island, and it was used for underage sex trafficking and or underage sex for the rich and powerful of the world. And so there are a lot of people on that list who do not want their names to be revealed. Some of them have already come out, and some of them are already doing damage control. The most famous name, of course, is Bill Clinton, who apparently was visited the island the most out of anyone else. So that's interesting. And also Bill Gates has been there frequently. He's he's come out and said, "Oh, it's strictly business, strictly business." And it kind of reminds you of all those guys who said, "Yeah, I read Playboy just for the articles," right? So it's interesting, right, why he would have to even say that. But nevertheless, it's obviously pedophilia in the main, right? It's just in your face pedophilia, and it's just kind of interesting. So Epstein, uh, apparently, it is said, committed suicide in August of 2019. But of course, he committed suicide while he was on suicide watch in a maximum security wing of the prison, where all of a sudden only those cameras in that wing suddenly malfunctioned. And so no one can ever see just how he committed suicide. And I read somewhere too that he had some broken bones, which makes it almost really unlikely that he was able to do this by himself. And so, of course, the meme is that he didn't kill himself. I have a Christmas ornament that I hang on the tree every year, and of course, it says this ornament did not hang itself. I think it's hilarious, but there it is. His accomplice is Ghislaine Maxwell, who's in prison for 20 years. She also refuses to release the list. And so one wonders why people haven't done it already, why they haven't released the list. Pretty much, if any of us, it was just a bunch of, Johns on the list, then that list would have since been published and everyone on that list disgraced and probably dead by now. But hey, these people obviously who are on the list have a lot of pull and they're keeping it out of the media. But Bondi said that there's no legal way to block the release of the list unless one is a child or one of the victims or a cooperating witness. Okay. And we can see that over the last 8 years or so, people have been trying to normalize pedophilia. You see expressions like MAPS, MAPS, or minor attracted person. Basically, it's pedophilia, right? And then there's grooming that goes on in the schools. It's all pretty sick. Now, the only upside of all of this, of course, is that a lot of the people who lean in this direction have outed themselves, right? I guess they thought that this could never end. Finally, they can just come out and basically announce to the world what their sexual preferences are, and they will be untouched. Well, as I said yesterday or the day before, the pendulum has swung in the opposite direction and in a much bigger way. And so now what do? You've outed yourself as a pedo, and now what do, right? So it's kind of interesting. And I thought it was also interesting that a lot of people are speculating that certain Christian organizations have been, heavily involved in this human slash sex trafficking kind of thing. I don't know. It's total speculation, right? But if it were true, then you can see them using mission work, right? Missionary endeavors as a cover for human trafficking, especially when it comes to orphans in other countries. I mean, they're orphans. Who's going to miss them, right? So that is certainly plausible, whether it is possible. And speaking of that, so USAID once again, um, why do they why do they do good, right? A couple of good things if they are completely horrible. And that is pretty much the modus operandi, right? The MO, the way that they do things, which makes it very difficult for them to get shut down, right? And so one might also simply say, why doesn't a liar lie all of the time? Because if they lied all the time, then you'd know that everything out of their mouth is a lie, and then they can't get away with it any longer. So a good liar only lies occasionally. And so, in the same way, USAID mixes good endeavors with a lot of their bad ones, so that when someone tries to come and shut them down or some accuses them of doing something evil, they turn and highlight the several good things that they do, like bringing food to hungry people, restoring water flow to people that are experiencing a drought, whatever. They'll highlight some of the good things which probably are totally legitimate, but then that is a smokescreen to hide all of the nefarious stuff that they're actually into. Mises Media released a video short, and it's titled "The Needy Are the Human Shields of the American Regime." Excellent, excellent video. I didn't catch the dude's name, but he comes out once a week or a couple times a week with these really great short videos, very much to the point. Awesome. You should probably give them a listen if you have a chance. But this is pretty much what USAID is a great example of how the government basically does what it does to make it difficult for their bureaucracies to get shut down, but at the same time represent themselves as being something very, very positive. Right. First thing you got to do, you got to give it a great name, a misleading name, right? Like USAID, United States Agency of International Development, right? It has nothing to do with helping poor people, but the name USAID, hey, it sounds pretty good. And then so you spend a fraction of your budget, in this case, $50 billion. Heck, you can spend $1 billion doing all this stuff. That's quite a lot of money. And so you can do a lot of good things with $1 billion, but 49 billion is in all the real evil stuff, right? When someone tries to end it, you post pictures of all the good things that you're doing. Like, look at all the people you're going to hurt. And so, like, it's that thing with college loans, right? Oh, you want to end college loans, which are enabling colleges to raise their tuitions, right? Uh, but then you're depriving all these kids of an education, right? And so you show all these videos and pictures of college students who won't be able to go to college anymore because you're cutting their loan allowance, right? But of course, we all know that if you end student loans, then college tuitions have to come down, right? And it's quite logical, right? But are organizations like USAID, USAID, or student loans, are they really helping people? If you still got to do it after decades, USAID has been around for over 60 years, and you still need them, really? Okay. Well, the USA Patriot Act is another example of a aptly named, nice, cool sounding piece of legislation, but in reality is something quite evil. And USA Patriot Act is the full name, and it stands for Uniting and Strengthening America by providing appropriate tools required to intercept and obstruct terrorism. I want to know who they're paying to come up with these acronyms. Because they're pretty interesting, right? And after a while, how do you keep coming up with new ones? Another one is Stock Act, Stop Trading on Congressional Knowledge Act. And it's basically congressional insider trading. If we did insider trading, we'd be sitting in jail. But of course, when congressional officials do it, they get rich, right? So that's the first thing you do. You come up with a really cool sounding name. You make sure they do a couple of good things that you can fall back on when someone accuses you of doing evil things. You say, no, 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 look at all these pictures of the wonderful things that I'm doing, right? And so that's USAID. That's what they're up to. But of course, many people are going to suffer because when you end something like USAID, the cover or the shield, the human shields that you use, they get hung out to dry, and that is really unfortunate. But if you were receiving money like that, you should have known that it was all going to come to an end one day. That gravy train can't last forever. So you would have made, preparations for when that actually happens. So what is going on? I mean, like I said, it seems with every episode now, we're living through Hurricane Trump, except I don't mind this hurricane so much, right? He's trying to fulfill basically everything he promised. And I've said this before when Obama said, I have a pen, right? And basically saying I can issue an executive order and then do whatever I want, right? So, uh, Trump basically, and I said, one day you're going to have a president who's going to do the same exact thing. But since Obama set the precedent, then you can't complain, right? You cheered Obama on when he did it. So you gotta suck it up, right? You gotta endure it when Trump does it, right? What goes around comes around, the pendulum swinging, right? And so he's saying, well, hey, I have a pen. I have many pens. And so he is just basically ripping through. I think he would go faster if he could sign these things faster. You know what I mean? If he didn't get writer's cramp, I mean, I think he would probably do a lot more. But of course, there's a process. You got to turn them into photo ops, right, to advertise the fact that you've done this. And everyone has to see that you're the one who's signing it, right? But and so basically he said, look, I made these promises. Why not? I got the pen. I'm going to make the promise and I'm going to make it happen as soon as possible. It harkens back to Machiavelli, what he wrote in The Prince, and I've talked about this before. But Niccolo Machiavelli wrote this short pamphlet 500 years ago talking about statecraft or politics, basically, and what you need to do if you need to bring in dramatic change. You got to do it all at once. And it makes me wonder if Trump read Machiavelli, right? Because it really seems to be following that playbook, right? It's scorched earth. You just do it, don't look back, and you do everything all at once, so much all at once that the people who are opposing you have trouble trying to figure out what they're going to try to push back against because there's just so much you're doing, right? So the rapidity of all of these executive orders, the speed at which Doge and all these other efforts that are trying to dismantle everything that has happened, not only in the last 8 years, but maybe in the last 60 years, right? With USID being examined, heavily scrutinized now that formed over 60 years ago, then what we're looking at is not just simply the past 8 years, but anything in government which is just too big of a cancer. And so we got to cut it out. So just go through a short list of some of the things that he's done so far today. He ended men and women's sports, right? And that goes along with the whole DEI and trans movements that we've been seeing, which I got to tell you is tragic. I mean, the whole trans movement is really tragic to me. I hope one day that people will look back and all of those people, and maybe even their children, finally grow up and realize what their parents have done to them in the name of virtue signaling, Oh, but my heart goes out for those kids, and yeah, I just hope that when they suddenly realize that they made a horrible, horrible mistake, that they know how to find their way back to sanity, if it's even possible at this point, right? So anyway, Trump had promised closing the border and deporting people, and that's what he's doing. And this discussion of ICE is big. It even came up in my school, but we don't have any undocumented students. It's not, it just doesn't happen, right? So, but the fact that even at this school we got to bring it up because everyone's talking about it. It's interesting, right? And that's how pervasive, like people are taking it seriously, which is pretty interesting. And then there's the termination of political appointees thought to be untouchable. And we read about this. I forget what it was called back in the day. Patronage. That's what it was. U.S. grant around the Civil War era. Patronage was the rage. I mean, if you became president, then all of these positions you appointed, right? And it's basically payback for all the political favors that they did for you to get you into office. And so now you have to use your power to appoint uh, basically people who are clowns, unqualified into these positions. And so now they get a nice paycheck. They get to brag to all their friends what they're doing in government while at the same time doing basically nothing. And it's perfectly fine. Like no one notices until like, say, for example, in LA, you have a wildfire that burns down all the houses in your neighborhood. Well, then people are asking, why didn't they do what was required? And it's because they weren't qualified in the first place. Then you got U.S. Treasury. The Treasury is what distributes the checks, the welfare checks, the Social Security checks, right? They control $6 trillion a year. So they write 1.3 billion checks, which totals $6 trillion every year, or it probably goes up every year. And so U.S. Treasury senior official David Lebrecht, I think, or Lebrecht, he spells it Lebryk, is resisting all of the requests to turn over the records, right? He's like, no, no, I can't, right? And it reminds me of how all those people, when you bring up the surveillance state, the NSA spying on everything, and they would say, well, if you got nothing to hide, right? And I'm just like, if you got nothing to hide, right, show us the books. And so there was a tug of war going on between Doge and Lebrick. And so finally he stepped down, he resigned. And so now they're going through the books and they're finding out all kinds of interesting things, right? Then you have the federal workforce itself, the government as a whole, 92% work remotely, right? That means they don't show up for work. They don't come into work. 92%, right? It's probably the janitors that are the 8%, right? That are just cleaning and recleaning buildings that are unoccupied. We're paying for all that too. So Trump is bringing that to an end. And if you think about it, a lot of them probably were working against Trump the whole time he was president the first time. And so he's like, well, okay, let's get rid of you. If you don't show up for work, then you're fired, right? But he did offer them a severance package. If they say they'll take early retirement by February 6th, that's tomorrow, February 6th, 2025, then they get a severance uh, package of 9 months pay, 8 months pay. But right, so they quit now, they continue to get paid for 8 months, and good luck on finding another job, right? But if you wait after February 6th, then you get nothing, right? And later on, you may be fired. And so it just popped up on my news feed that 40,000 federal workers accepted that early severance package. I'm surprised it isn't more, but I think they're all rolling the dice and saying, yeah, he won't be able to do that. Right. The Supreme Court will say it's unconstitutional, and so then our jobs are safe, right? We'll tell that to a lot of the people in the Department of Justice, the DOJ, and the FBI who have already been fired. And that's huge, right? So basically, these are two of the organizations, bureaucracies that went after Trump, right? Harassing him, falsely accusing him, making up rules and applying rules in the wrong way, doing all kinds of things to Trump. Well, now he's president and he is gutting those agencies, clearing them out of people who obstruct the president. The new transportation secretary was told to fire anyone who's underperforming as a worker below the basic standards. We already talked about how USAID was funding terrorists. For example, the new Syrian government is basically Al Qaeda, renamed, split offs, offshoot, whatever you want to call it. But they're terrorists, and the United States are supporting them. So there was a concept in the business crossover class that I taught, which is like you try to innovate faster than the government can regulate what you just innovated, right? So you're trying to innovate so quickly that the government can't keep up and cannot regulate or come to control anything that you do, right? So you're so Trump and his administration is blowing apart so many different things that it makes it difficult for the deep state to keep up, right? So there's so many things that are being, dissolved, shut down, defunded, whatever, that the government doesn't know really where to push back. And this is a beautiful thing. I got to admit that aside from the whole Gaza, Ukraine uncertainty and what I would totally not agree with policy like building a beachfront property on Gaza. I mean, come on. It just, I don't know. And I'm sure you heard that Trump's son-in-law has been selling real estate on the Gaza beach. So this is just sad if this is true, if this is in fact why Trump is doing it, because then he is seriously corrupt, abusing his office to enrich himself. But hopefully that's not what it is, but you never know these days. I just can't, it's hard to predict anything these days. There is a danger, however. I heard an episode from Rafi Farber, who does is called the Endgame and no, right? Is that it? The Endgame Investor, right? The Endgame Investor. And he basically talked about how what the danger is. And the danger is that we are a debt-based economy, which means that from year to year, the debt always must get bigger. That's why our deficits keep going up, right? And that is how this economy remains propped up. Otherwise, if the debt starts to shrink, then the bubble pops, right? And when the bubble pops, who knows what will happen? And so maybe this is, this good thing that Trump is doing, which should have been done decades ago, finally being done, is going to lead to the big popping of the most ginormous bubble every ever, right? And you might say, well, is there a way to avoid? No, it's got to come down, right? All of the malinvestment, all of the bad investment that has taken place over at least the last 60 years has to unwind. And a lot of businesses have to go under, which means that a lot of people are going to lose their work. But that's okay. That it has to be cleared out. You must uh, you know, move aside, push aside all the obsolete industry, all the industries which prevent better and new technology from being applied or even researched, right? Get rid of it all. But of course, if you do that, and I'm repeating, the bubble might pop. And if that happens, hold on to your butts, right? Because no one knows what'll happen. And that's the episode for today. Uh, yeah, I'll talk to you guys next time. These are some exciting times, aren't they?